Today's speaker is Jakob van Wielink. Jakob is a leadership coach and grief counselor. He is a founding partner for the School of Transition in the Netherlands. He is also a faculty member at the Portland Institute for Loss and Transition and a member of the International Work Group on Death, Dying, and Bereavement. Jakob works internationally as an executive coach for leaders and their teams and is an educator and trainer of professional coaches. Following 3 previous books with the same publisher on leadership, coaching, and grief, the first volume of his trilogy on leadership, The 5 Pillars of Leadership During Transition, will be published in 2026 by the British publisher Routledge. Welcome, Jakob.
How great to be with you. I met someone with a coffee in my hand saying, "Did you fly all the way just for this talk?" I said, "Yes." That's a nice idea, isn't it? I'm very grateful to Amber. Tomorrow I'll present a keynote at a conference for grief counselors at the University of La Crosse. I did this last year as well, and Amber saw and heard me talk, and she reached out to me in January and said, would you be willing to consider addressing our congregation in May? And as I just shared with Amber, I think when such an invitation comes, I always tend to believe that the Holy Spirit is doing its work. So you need to have a good reason to say no. So I said yes. Thank you, Amber, for your trust and your kind invitation and your very warm welcome this morning. I'm from the Netherlands, that beautiful, small country in Europe. And my name is Jakob. I'm married to Svetlana, my wife. And Svetlana sounds rather Russian, doesn't it? That's because she's Russian. And we are both happy to have a daughter in our life. That means that it's her daughter, which I proudly call my daughter as well. I will get back to that a little bit later, because it's a profound joy, but there is a grief that goes along with it as well. But that's a cliffhanger. So tomorrow I'm here, and last week I was here as well, not in La Crosse, but in Washington, for a very, very sad reason that I would like to start with. Because what I would like to do this morning with you is share some thoughts about how do we keep focus when the world around is challenging us. And I'm explicitly not going to go into politics. You will. I think that's a good idea, isn't it? Although there would be good reasons to address some political issues, not only here in the US, but around the world, it's a time of polarization, and I'm sure your heart is aching at some times as well. We've really seemed to have lost the ability, we haven't lost it, but we seem to have lost the ability to simply sit together at one table and connect how different we are, even if we're very different. You know, I'm a Catholic, you're Universalists. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Just bring different perspectives together, different people, and that's what I want to talk about with you this morning as well. But I was here last week, and it was because of the funeral at Arlington National Cemetery of the son of one of my best friends, Jill Harrington. And Jill Harrington is a well-known grief counselor in the US, and she writes prolifically on the topic of superhero, and the role superheroes can play when we face grief in our lives. Now, this is what happens, and I'm always emotional because it's really very fresh, and I keep on being emotional when I think of it. Her son, Alex, was a very, very gifted young man, 25 years of age. And he was having autism. And he lost his father, who was buried at Arlington because he was in the military, at a very young age. He was 4 years old. And he was struggling with that. So he was struggling both with his autism and with the grief of not having a father figure in his life. And Jill and Alex, Big Al, as she would call him, they would travel the US to create awareness for the theme of autism and grief. Because there's quite some challenge, as you may understand. Now, he had recently moved. They live in Bowie, my friend Jill, close to Baltimore. And he had recently moved to a facility with a lot of people with mental challenges. Although I hate the word, I think we all have mental challenges. But that's for another time. But he had recently moved there, and there were protocols in place. And the protocols were, when there is a crisis, for him there was a protocol to first call his mom and then call 911. And he only lived there for 3 days. And on a Saturday night, he had a mental crisis, a suicidal mental crisis. And he called his mom, and his mom asked him to call the police. And the police came, 3 officers. And to make a very long story short, he was walking out the facility with a knife in his hand, a kitchen knife, just nothing special. A big guy. And you could easily just approach him and say, stop it. The police officers walked him, and 3 police officers shot him on the place. And Jill is in despair. She's simply in despair. And there's a lot of legal and political issues that she's facing. But she lost her son, and I won't say a good friend, but I met Alex so many times, and he was the most loving, the most charming, the most curious, the most helping man I could imagine. Always curious, always sharing his dreams for life, always talking about his father. He is no more. So there we were at Arlington last week. I flew back for 1 day, back and forth, just to be with her. What can you do? Then just be there and cry and cry. Now, there's one thing I know for Jill. I don't know how her life will unfold in the years to come. As a grief counselor, I know that we should be reluctant in offering cheap words of hope, don't we? Or as people, we should be reluctant. The best gift we can give often aren't words, but holding hands, crying together, keep on mentioning the name, and again and again and again for years and decades. So probably that's what we're going to do. But I also know that Jill will have to face that ultimate question, and that's that question of meaning. That's the question of meaning we all have to face at many points in our life. I think you weren't born and raised in Disneyland, and neither was I. So we all have moments in life that when we experience them and we're looking back, we have to ask ourselves the questions, what does it mean to me? And what does it mean for the question of who am I? So it's a question of identity. How do the crucibles in life, how do the moments in life that happens to us, how do they shape us to become the persons that we are or that we maybe want to be? Now, identity is really challenged to the max when we face loss. That's one of the reasons I became a grief counselor. It's a nice job. It's a nice job, really. Why? Because being with people that try to find meaning when they experience senseless things, it's paradoxal, it's interesting, it's fascinating, it's difficult, but it's rewarding. It's rewarding because it takes time. It needs me to calm down, and to always go to the places that I really wouldn't like to go. It's always going back to the place where you don't want to be. That's where you need to be if you want to find that answer to the question, who am I, at the core of my identity? So I'm curious as to see how that will unfold for Jill. But I do have an example of how that may go, and one example of someone I would like to mention, and I would like to share an example of my own as well at the end. Very recently, a good friend of mine died, and I was not really sad, because she was very old. She had lived her life to the fullest, 99 years old. Wow. I always tell my wife I want to become 104. She says that I need to lose weight in order to achieve that, but I'm still optimistic that and hopeful that I'll have some decades to go. But she was 99 years old, and her name is Edith Eger. And some of you may have heard of her. She was called the ballerina of Auschwitz. And she wrote a bestseller, and she was on the show with Oprah Winfrey, and many other people. And she wrote the book that's called The Choice. Even in hell, flowers can flourish. That's the subtitle, if I paraphrased or something like that. But The Choice. Now, here's her story. And we became friends some 7 years ago when I read her book, The Choice, and I highly recommend your reading it. If there's one book this year you read, make sure it's going to be The Choice. There's probably an audio version of it as well. And in that book, and after I read it, I invited her to come to the Netherlands, and at that point, the first time, she couldn't come, but she invited me to come to her home in San Diego. And risk-taker that I am, I booked a ticket, flew to San Diego, and had a transforming life experience. In her book, she writes how she lost her parents in Auschwitz on the first day of arrival, and they were sent to the gas chambers. And she was there with Magda, her sister. She was a few years older, and I think she passed away like 3 years ago now. And in her book, she describes in two parts. The first part is her growing up as a young girl in Budapest, and she dreamt of becoming a ballet dancer in the Royal Opera of Budapest. And she describes how she was taken to Auschwitz and how her experience in Auschwitz was. And then she emigrated to the US, and then she describes how she became a psychotherapist, a very well-known psychotherapist, helping people with deep trauma. Now, The Choice, why is that book called The Choice? She describes a very profound moment. And the moment is when she is asked to go to the showers, and you may know a little bit of that history of how inmates were asked to go to the showers, and many of them, after taking a shower, were taken to the gas chambers. But she was there with Magda, and they were shaved. And at a certain point, Magda, her sister, asked her, "Edie, can you tell me how I look?" And it's a very touching moment, one of many in the book. And he says, "Well, what could I say? If I were to be very honest, I would say, wow, you look horrible. With the skin full of, I don't know the English word, but full of stuff." And I took a breath, and I looked her in the eyes, and I said, "Magda, you've got such beautiful eyes that were for years covered by the long hairs you have. You've got such beautiful eyes." And that, she says, was the moment that I realized, looking back, that we always have a choice. We always have a choice. Where do we want to put our focus on? To the things that are wrong, bad, ugly, or to the things that are beautiful? Now, her book shows that this is not a plastic, fantastic, short journey. Like, just look for the silver lining. Just look for the positive. In order to be able to look for the positive, that's the paradox in life probably. We have to go to the depth, to the dark. As a Christian, for me, what is very inspiring is the Paschal mystery. Christ rose from the death. Wow, talking about mystery. But That was on a Saturday, a Sunday, but there was Good Friday first. Well, of course you know it. It was Good Friday first. Why is that Good Friday? Because you cannot celebrate the positive. You cannot celebrate the joy if, as a human, you're unwilling or unable or don't know how to also celebrate or at least ponder on what Good Friday has to offer to you. And that's the human condition. Our brain hates pain. That's how you and I were born, regardless of whether you're from Wisconsin or the Netherlands. Our brain hates pain. And we need in life people in the first place. We need people who show us that pain is not the end of things, but that pain is something we have to sit with. And hopefully we had a mother or a father or a coach or a music teacher or someone in a congregation who shows us how that works. Not to be afraid when it's dark. Now, Edie, she had to go that way. So she knew deep from the inside that if she were to find healing, and healing doesn't mean that you're not wounded anymore. Healing is not that you are then in Disneyland, although that for me is not a... not enough. 2 hours is enough. But healing doesn't mean that you find yourself in a place where you're not hurt or where you don't feel sadness. Not at all. No, healing means that as a broken human being with your wounds, you are able to reconnect both with yourself and the world around you. That's what healing really means. We are healed, we are a whole person because of the fact that we are wounded. Isn't that interesting? Henry Nouwen, the priest, he would call it, we are all wounded healers. We are all wounded healers. So Edie, she really understood that in order for her to heal, there was in the end one place that she needed to return to. Auschwitz. And you will maybe read in that book yourself how that journey unfolds. She asked her sister if she was willing to join, and her sister said, no, I never ever want to go back to that place. And she felt that she needed to go. And she describes that eventually she felt when she was back to that very dark place, that that's where the healing kicked in. I turned, she said, Auschwitz into a classroom. I turned Auschwitz into a place of curiosity. And the trigger for her was that she started to work with Vietnam veterans in the 70s, early 80s. And they triggered her to the max. The traumas of the veterans triggered her traumas. And she saw the traumas of that fellow travelers as an invitation for her to find healing in her heart. And she eventually did. I recall that we had an appointment from 10 to 11. So we arrived together with my good friends Klaartje and Marnix. We arrived at her home and we ended up being there till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was so transforming. And we were only sitting there for 10 minutes and I burst out crying, really. I couldn't stop crying and I could hardly breathe. And I said, Edie, well, I think I said Dr. Eger then, Dr. Eger, can we please pause for a moment because I really need to cry? And she burst out laughing and said, ooh, I love it when a man cries. It's a sign of good health. And for me, that was like a confirmation, like, yeah, Jakob, go on, that's the right path. Because I honestly believe, I'm working in the field of leadership and that vulnerability is the primary asset for any leader in any organization, either political or in a church or whatever constellation. If you have access to your vulnerability, that's where you invite other people to find the healing that they need to find. And we're not going to talk about politics. Yeah. So, yeah. So vulnerability is an asset. Now, so she then wrote a foreword to one of my books on leadership and calling, because that's an idea that I would like to introduce to you. So in that foreword, she said, through going back to the places where I was hurt, where I was traumatized, and finding slowly but surely healing, I found my calling. And then the last sentence in that foreword of the book is like, if I can do it, you can do it. And I like it. I like it when people say it. When people who went through the most horrible things, for me often are an inspiration if they show me how it might be possible. And it's not to say that what I've experienced is not worth or is less. No, but it's an inspiration. Okay, I might consider going that same path. So calling. We often think that when we're talking about calling, it's about what we're doing, the roles that we play in our lives. But the most important thing about our calling is not what we do, but it's who we are. Who we are at the core of our identity. That's the first question of our calling. Who are you? Who am I? And the things that we do will flow from that first question. Who are you? Who am I? Now, meeting other people, writing about it is still at some safe distance, but I, of course, had to apply that to my own life as well. And I was asking myself, who am I? And what meaningful things would I like to do in my life? And I realized that there were, for sure, two big wounds in my life that I needed to address. And the first one was my history of being severely bullied between the age of 7 and 12, both physically and mentally. And that was really hard. And I only started to discover the impact of, because I knew, of course, as a fact, intellectually I knew I was bullied, but I only discovered the effects of it when I was 35, 36. I started to realize that having been bullied really made me anxious of groups. Welcome. and it made me fundamentally scared to trust people. I would say I trusted people, but it would not be 100% true. It was a little bit, not fake, but not 100% true. And I knew when I was starting to work as a grief counselor and as a leadership coach that if you don't trust people, it will be hard to be a real companion. You know, trust is the basis of everything we do in our lives. If you don't trust one another, it's going to be very difficult. So what I needed to do is find healing. And that's a long story, but one of the things that I did was that I started sharing with other men in particular. Opening up my heart to other men, crying with other men. Oh wow, that's so healing. I became a hugging man. So that was the first step. But there was another thing that I really needed to look at, and I told you that I'm the proud father of Vika, Victoria. Isn't that a beautiful name? Victoria. My wife tells me always the story that it took her 2 weeks in order to figure out what her name was going to be. And people around her were asking, but you need to have a name. But she said, it's not there yet. And after 2 weeks, she said it's going to be Victoria. She will be victorious. And she's beautiful. She's 33, working as an eye doctor in the Netherlands, and she loves her work and her friendships, and oh, it's so great to have her in our lives. When I met my wife, though, I had one big dream. I was a bit late. I got married when I was 38, and I had one dream. I always knew, as of when I was very young, I really would love to be a father. And my wife and I really tried the natural way, which was fun. and we also needed help from doctors. And there were many doctors that were willing to help us. But there was a moment when we had to look each other in the eye and the doctor as a witness saying, I don't know why. I am not God, but it's not going to happen. You will not be a father. And that really challenged me at my core. Really, when that opened a whole grieving process, because then I started to really doubt myself as a man again. Who am I? Do I deserve a place at the table? Now, intellectually, I knew. Everyone would tell me, yes, of course you belong. But deep down in my heart, I felt that I was a second-class man. Because I wasn't able to be a father. I wasn't able to really deeply connect with the stories of other parents, I thought. So that was a grieving process. But that grieving process really opened my curiosity as well. Because I knew one thing for sure. I was young then, going on 40, and I knew I don't want to lead a cynical life. That's not who I am. I don't want to lead a cynical. I was angry at God. I was angry at my wife for not giving me a child. I know it's not fair, but that was what I was feeling. I was angry at myself, and I knew if I'm going to be an angry man, that's not very inspiring. So I had to really ask for help here as well, and that's what I did. And in that grieving process, to my own surprise, I discovered that, oh yes, I am a friend. When I found healing for my history of bullying, when I found healing for my not having become a biological father, I am a friend, and I am a father, but my fathership, is that an English word? Fatherhood. In Dutch we say vaderschap. Yeah. My fatherhood shows in different ways. My therapist said every time you write a book, light a candle, because it's part of your legacy. As if you were to have children of another kind. So finding healing for me meant that I eventually understood that who I am. I'm now 51. I'm Jakob, and I know that I am a friend and a father. That's how I approach the world, with curiosity. With curiosity, and there's one book that I would like to mention as well. It's from Scott Shijoka. I hope I pronounce his name well. He's a professor at a Californian university. And he wrote that book, Seek. A second book you might want to add to your list. He's an homosexual professor at a university, and he is not pro a certain president. And yet he took a sabbatical because he said, I want to understand, I really want to understand what is going on in crowds that cheer for the president, that really make me feel unsafe, unworthy, unwhatever. So what he did is really quite astonishing, really. And I had some conversations with him when I read this book. He took the sabbatical and he explicitly went into the crowds where he felt he shouldn't go to. And he went to churches where they were preaching things that made him feel that he didn't belong. And to his own surprise, he said, and the whole book is about curiosity. How do you meet people who have such radical different views than your own views? And this whole book is a book about finding healing for his own trauma. So that's a big paradox as well. By explicitly sitting at the table with people who have radically opposite views and being curious as to where does your opinion come from, along the way he found healing for all traumas, and going back to his childhood where he found that he wasn't welcomed with his opinion and his identity and the way he looked at the world. Now, for many people, this is a stretch, I know. But I believe that is all we can do. If we want to find our calling, if we want to have our focus, because that's what I want to talk about you this morning, how do we find focus in a world of despair and chaos and polarization? We have to do the radical opposite of what we tend to believe. Tend to believe that is good for us. And I don't want to be, let me tell you what I do want to be. What I do want to be is challenging you. I know how easy it can be to find yourselves in your own bubble, isn't it? And we need a bubble. Is that a right word in American as well? A bubble? Yeah, your own. Yeah, we need bubbles. Yeah, champagne as well every now and then. But we need bubbles. We need our own family that is hopefully safe. We need the sporting facility. We need church. We need this as a bubble. We need it. We need bubbles to find comfort, to release. How profoundly emotional to see you standing in that microphone. Wow, we don't do that in our church, but I'm inspired. I'm going to take that idea back to share your sorrows. And probably for many of you, that means that it gives air to what you're feeling, and it gives you strength to venture out in the world again and to meet other people. And my encouragement to you is to combine this bubble with other bubbles. Don't believe this is the only safe place. There are other places as well. And I believe when we want to build a world that is more peaceful, we need to explicitly go to the tables we would not easily go to. Meet the people that we might think that's not my cup of tea. I think that's where the healing is to be found. And not to have lengthy discussions, but to sit with one another and ask, tell me your story. Because we all really, and that's what I came to learn in the past 25 years of working with leaders around the world, we all have a story. We all have a backpack. And we are all carrying it. And it's too heavy if you keep on carrying it alone. Reach out. Reach out to tables that you're unfamiliar with. Bring that healing to the world. I believe that is part of my calling. And don't be distracted by certain political figures, by people that you disagree with. Everything comes and everything goes. And in Europe, I can tell you, I'm having talks with friends. I can honestly share that with you. We are sometimes quite afraid of what's going on with us in Europe as well. Will we still be protected by the friends that we held dear for centuries? Or are we being left alone? When I say it with some emotion, because it's scary. It's scary. The things that we held true till a few years ago seem to change rapidly. But we need one another. That's why I flew to La Crosse. And a last word, many people in the Netherlands are asking me, why on earth are you flying to the US? How can you allow yourself? Honestly, they are asking it. And I say, well, that's not how I look at the world. I'm not flying to the US because of a certain political figure. I'm flying to the US to meet friends, to make new friends, to be with colleagues and to learn from one another and to go back inspired and hopefully left some inspiration on the place. Because that's what we need to do. That's why we come together on Sunday as well, to be inspired. Keep the focus. If you know what your calling is, if you know who you are, and keep on questioning yourself and keep on questioning each other, if you know who you are, and if you know what you have to do, then I honestly believe, like Edith Eger, there's not so much reason to be afraid. There's not so much reason to be afraid. When you find your roots, you can do this. Yeah, my answer is blowing in the wind. This is what I wanted to share with you this morning. I think it's 15 minutes or a bit longer. Thank you for being with you.